What's up, guys? Welcome to Venus in the Void. And in today's video, we are going to be talking about the void. So, with a channel called Venus and the Void, I felt it only right to discuss these elements individually and kind of give them their own space. And while we kind of all have a good grasp of what Venusian or Venus energy is, the divine feminine, it's beauty, it's luxury, it's so many things, it's love, it's it's seduction. I don't feel like we talk about the void enough. And I wanted to give the void its own video and its own space and it's just honor it on its own. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. We are going to be approaching this from a mythological perspective, a life experience perspective, maybe throw in some Carl Jung, Joseph Campbell, because those are my heroes, my literary heroes anyway. And I did type up some ideas, so you might see me looking at my laptop. But I want to open up with um, maybe a little bit of reflection and kind of how I define the void in a general sense. The void is what I would call kind of the reckoning. It can manifest in your life as like the dark night of the soul, in astrology, which we are going to break this down astrologically as well. So we're going to break this down mythologically, personal experience, philosophically, and also in astrology, like what you can look for in your birth chart to see where you might have that void or where that might manifest in your life, and the timing as well. So it can manifest like your Saturn return, right? It can manifest as the dark night of the soul, these ambiguous terms that basically mean rock bottom. Um, and another way that I like to consider the void is kind of like the sacred space between who you have always been and who you're becoming. That's another great way that I think to describe the void. So let's talk about personal reflection. Let's start with that. I personally experienced the void in 2022. I'm going to dedicate an entire video to my spiritual awakening, but um, my spiritual awakening is what made me face the void. Now, I think I had been operating in the void for many years. I think since 2020, during the pandemic, I had a lot of my own ideas challenged. I had kind of lost grip of my own identity and I had become a mother. And kind of how I said, your that space between who you've always been and who you're becoming, that's kind of where I found myself between 2020 and 2022. I didn't have a spiritual practice. I was raised in a Christian church. I've had many religious influences on my life, Muslim, Jewish influences as well on my life, but I never really claimed a religion. And it wasn't until 2022 that I started to experience God, the universe, whatever you want to call it. So that was my reckoning or my awakening with the void. And like I said, I'll go into a full video about how that happened because it's very funny, but that was my introduction into the void where I saw, and it just turned 333 on the clock, where I saw lack in my life. And I kind of felt like I literally felt like I was between worlds. I felt like I was, transitioning from one identity to another, and it was gut wrenching. It was fascinating. I also went through heartbreak at that time, and so I was just kind of triggered into, like thrown into the void, thrown into the void. And I literally had heartbreak, shift in identity. I suffered a loss, and I had a spiritual awakening all at the same time. And that sacred space is where I would say I experienced the void for the first time. So, what is the void? Um, some people may call this a Saturn return. Some people may call this your Black Moon Lilith, your Chiron, whatever. We'll circle back to that when we get to the astrology portion. But I believe that the void is a sacred space. I think it's an opportunity for rebirth. I think it's an opportunity to create. You will probably be triggered. Like, imagine going into this empty, dark sanctuary with a bunch of mirrors and having to face yourself. You could see that as a punishment if you wanted to, but you could also see this as an opportunity to really reflect and read and look at yourself and notice things about yourself. That is the void. I believe that the void is where where maybe you feel a little bit isolated and you feel a little bit misunderstood. I think that's a great way to describe what the void feels like, how it may manifest in your life. Now, Venus and the Void was a very strategic name. I think both of these speak to the divine feminine. I think Venusian energy, as we mentioned, is a little bit more overt. It's a little bit more obvious, because it can be known as like dainty and loving and beautiful and all of that. But the Void is also quite feminine. To me, the Void is the dark feminine. And I think from the very, very beginning of our lives, we're born with the void. Think of the void with the uh as like a womb, a dark womb, right? When we're brought into this world, when we incarnate into this life, we incarnate in darkness. That is where we get our nutrients, in darkness. That's where we're connecting with the divine mother or our actual biological mother, right? Um, so to me, I think that the void is deeply feminine, and I think it's a very natural state. It's a state that we're born in, and I think it's something that we uh, will revisit quite often in our life. I think that the void is an opportunity for creative energy, right? Think about the womb. It is sacred. It is literally a place of creation and procreation. And in ancient mysticism, the void or the shadow can represent a gateway to transitioning, transformation, which is what it did for me. After facing the void in my own life, again, I had all these things happen at one time. I had a spiritual awakening, heartbreak, identity loss, identity shift, everything. When I had all of that stuff happen in the material world, it catapulted something in me deeply, and it really got me in touch with my divine feminine energy, and it really got me in contact with this transformative energy. And I quite literally am not the same person that I was before, and I mean that in the best way possible. And one day I will share that story, um but I do want to get through this and just kind of get that out there. So why do we resist the void? Because I feel like there's always a challenge. And this is something that Carl Jung talks about and Joseph Campbell talks about, my two heroes, my literary heroes. They talk about in their work quite a bit resisting. Joseph Campbell talks about the hero's journey, and Carl Jung talks about the different archetypes and the shadow and facing the self and the anima. I think that we resist the void, especially in today's world, because we don't have time for it. When you go through a dark night of the soul, when you go through and you face your shadow, it's not convenient. It wasn't convenient for me. In fact, I feel like in my personal life, I feel like as I went through the void and I kind of was facing my own shadow, I felt like I was losing grip. I really lost grip on a lot of the things in my life, materially, in terms of like my 3D, like the world that I was living in, and it was definitely difficult to balance those things. It took a lot more effort to get things done, in terms of like focusing on like material things, because when you face the void, you kind of operate in this other realm. It feels like, at least for me, it did. But it's a place that you go to really get to know yourself, and you're not always going to like what you see, which is another reason I think people resist the void, because when you're faced with the void or the shadow, all you have to face is yourself. That can be extremely difficult, and so I think people resist that. It will force you to face unhealed wounds. It'll force you to question your own dogmas, your own beliefs, your cultures. It'll cause you to realize the relationships in your life that no longer serve you, um, including the relationship with yourself. It'll cause you to analyze, how do you treat yourself? How do you treat your inner child? Those things can be very difficult. What does the void give us? What do we gain after we face the void or our shadow? So I broke this down into 5 things. It gives you what I just mentioned: clarity on what no longer serves us. It gives you access to intuition, softness, and divine connection. That's what it did for me. I was operating highly in my masculine energy, which people who meet me today, if I tell them how I was, 3, 4 years ago, they don't believe me. People who meet me today do not understand the person I was before that. I was extremely masculine. I was always in survival mode. I was always in like I was always in like survival mode. I felt like my nervous system was a wreck. And it wasn't until I faced the void that changed and it softened me. That is what I got from facing the void, the shadow. Healing the control wounds. That's what it did for me. It allows you to be receptive of what's coming towards you, and it gives you a rebirth of the sacred divine energy inside of you. I don't know why that was so difficult for me to say that. When you are forced there, do not resist. Do not resist it. Don't resist your dark night of the soul. Don't resist your Saturn return. Be at peace with it, because ultimately that is what's going to you being thrusted and forced into your shadow is ultimately going to be the biggest significator that you are going into the next level of your life. So don't resist that. If you are in the void right now, you're not broken. You're just becoming. You are becoming the new version of you. So remember that. In the next video, I'm going to break this down into where you can find the void in your astrological chart, because I think that I'm an astrology girly. It is what it is. But I do think that it'll be helpful for you to be able to look at your birth chart and see where this might manifest in your life, and possibly the timing that you can expect this to be happening in your life. So with love and light and a little bit of lace, I'll catch you in the next video.